Welcome to episode 75 of the MMA Rundown podcast. I know we're running a little bit late this week, but I've been pretty busy, so I figured I actually had a little bit of downtime right now, so might as well still fit this one in rather than skipping out for the week. So I'll try to be a little quick here, but we've got the normal topics that we'll talk about. So obviously there was a fight on Saturday that was between Michelle Waterson and Angela Hill, so I'll recap that main event, recap the UFC Vegas 10 full card, also recap the two Bellator events that went on back-to-back on Friday and Saturday, preview the really big event that's coming up this week with a lot of really good fights on it. That's going to be headlined by Tyron Woodley and Colby Covington. There's some talk between Dustin Poirier and Tony Ferguson. That fight appeared to be off. Now it seems like there's still a chance. So I'll talk about what's been going on with that fight, when they've been trying to make it, and what's been happening, and where I think it's going to go from here. We've got what seems to be the conclusion of the story with Navid Afkari, who is the Iranian Greco national champion, who the story goes from then went to a protest and then was singled out for execution by the Iranian government, and according to all sources right now was in fact executed, and that was mentioned on the broadcast. We've also got an interesting storyline within USA Wrestling. The guy who represented the world team the last time that there actually was a world team in 2019, Daton Fix, at 125 pounds / 57 kilograms, tested positive for Ostarine, which is a substance that's actually popped up a few different times in MMA as well. So I'll talk about that situation and what it's going to mean for USA Wrestling. And then the last topic to get to is going to be Nick Diaz possibly returning. And obviously, given that I'm making that the last topic, you can imagine where I'm going to go with that in terms of how likely I think it's going to be. But back to the top, we have Michelle Waterson versus Angela Hill. To be perfectly honest, for this particular fight, there was Bellator going on at the same time, so I was kind of switching between screens, so I wasn't watching close enough to the point where I could actually judge this thing. Early on, it looked like Hill probably won round one. Round two, I wasn't focused as much in on, but I think that was probably one of those pivotal rounds, so it's tough for me to really judge this fight when round two is a pivotal round and I wasn't paying super close attention. But it seemed like there was a wide range of people, some saying that they thought that Waterson had done enough to win that, others saying that they thought Hill had done enough to win that round. So you'd either be 2-0 Hill at that point or 1-1. Third round was more clearly in favor of Waterson. Granted, she did get a takedown. It wasn't doing a ton of work from top, but she still was controlling for the most part, and it was pretty close on the feet. I think in total strike, she still outlanded Angela Hill for that round, so you have to give round 3 to Waterson. Rounds 4 and 5 were a little bit closer, but still I think that Waterson was starting to have some better success with the volume. It did seem like Hill landed some of the heavier shots, but Waterson was doing a better job landing at volume, and it looked like she was able to win those 2 rounds. One of the judges gave it 4 rounds to 1 for Waterson, so I guess the idea there would be rounds 2 through 5. We had a judge that won 48-47 for Hill, and then another one who went 48-47 for Waterson, giving Michelle Waterson the split decision win. As far as what this does for the division, Michelle Waterson was the number 8 ranked fighter fighting the number 13 ranked fighter. Because the split decision win over number 13, I don't know, that really moves her up a whole lot. For Angela Hill, it proves that she's pretty close with someone who's ranked ahead of her, so it doesn't really move her down that much. So it's really not like there's a major consequence to this fight in terms of what the result was and what it tells us moving forward. And I guess that's part of the reason why people are like, wow, that's really your main event. There's really not a whole lot to get out of that, but that's what we got. So in the co-main event, it's kind of crazy that this was a co-main event fight. Now, granted, the fight itself was fairly entertaining, but Ottoman Zaitar versus Kama Worthy. Worthy in his first couple of fights was the underdog and found ways to win. So I guess people assumed here that him fighting against a 12-0 up-and-comer, that he would do the same thing he had done in his last couple of fights and pull off an upset as well. But Zaitar was able to land a nice flurry on him early, was just kind of going back and forth. In some cases, it would be a cross hook, and in other cases, it would just be hook, 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 hook. So just a lot of looping punches, but was able to find a home on Worthy, and then when Worthy was trying to cover up, Zaitar was able to continue landing on him, knocked him down. Worthy wasn't really doing a great job of blocking the punches on the ground, so the ref stepped in and stopped it. That looked like a perfectly fine stoppage to me. The fight before that was Roxanne Modafferi versus Andrea Lee. I thought that Lee actually won this fight. It went unanimous decision to Modafferi. Modafferi was able to get takedowns at times, but she did basically nothing from top. Would throw some arm punches here and there, but just didn't seem like the punches were really doing any damage at all. So even though she did rack up a lot of control time, she wasn't doing much with the control time and not on the feet. It seemed like for the most part, Andrea Lee was getting the better of those exchanges. So Modafferi did get the win here, but I thought that was not necessarily the best decision. But it seems like Andrea Lee has sort of been on the wrong end of some close decisions recently, and this is really no different for her. Fight between Mike Rodriguez and Ed Herman. First off, I'm going to operate on the assumption that this fight will be reviewed and that Mike Rodriguez will be given a TKO win. And that is why I'm not going to be terribly upset about what happened, because I think that in the end, they're going to get this right, and Mike Rodriguez will have a second-round TKO win on his record for this, and Ed Herman will have the loss. One of the first things that came to my mind with this fight, though, is the fight between Gegard Mousasi and Chris Weidman. Now, that fight was in New York. It was not in Las Vegas. But recap of what happened there is Weidman was kind of tired in the first round, or was working really hard in the first round, sort of tired himself out, was pretty tired in the second round. It appeared as though he was a down fighter and was sort of baiting Mousasi to throw a knee. Mousasi throws a knee, and in real time, and from what the ref saw, it looked like that knee was illegal, and because the ref called an illegal knee, Chris Weidman was like, okay, well, if I'm going to be given 5 minutes and I'm already tired, let me just take the 5 minutes here and relax. And while Chris Weidman is in the middle of getting his 5 minute break, they go to replay, I think unbeknownst to Weidman, and on the replay they realize that the knee was legal, and then decide, well, you know what, if he's this hurt off of a legal knee, then we're just going to have to call a TKO right here. So in that case, in the midst of the injury timeout, so to speak, they actually went to a replay, found that it was not a foul, and then made a call right there on the spot, TKO. In this case, there was no replay, so while Ed Herman was sort of taking his injury timeout, so to speak, no one was really looking at a replay, and I guess that's just one of those things where that's something they have in New York but they don't have in Vegas, which seems kind of odd. But again, I'm no expert on all the different states and what their rules are versus each other. I mean, you kind of know what the unified rules are, but there's some small little differences like instant replay, and apparently that's the difference between New York and Las Vegas. But either way, I think they're going to take a look at this, and they're going to find that the knees were clean, Ed Herman was hurt. You got to call a TKO on that. As far as the trouble that Chris Taione is getting in on this, you got to understand that from a ref standpoint, it's tough to get a really good angle on these knees when you have one guy up against the fence and the other guy's throwing a knee where if he's elevating the knee pretty much up at his hip level or higher, it's going to be hidden unless you're at a side angle on it. So a lot of times it's hard to really see exactly the moment that a knee lands, where exactly it lands. And if the guy does make it look like it's a knee to the groin, sometimes you make a guess there. Sometimes you're right, sometimes you're not. It's one of those things where it's like, if you look at the Daniel Cormier versus Stipe Miocic fights, for example, Mark Goddard did not actually see the eye poke that Stipe Miocic landed on Daniel Cormier, so Mark Goddard let it go. When in reality there was an eye poke and Mark Goddard should not have let it go, but he was like, well, I didn't see it. It looks like there probably was, but I didn't actually see it, so I'm not going to make the call. That is the right idea, but in that case, by not making an educated guess there, he kind of fucked Daniel Cormier in a way. In this case, the ref didn't see where the knee landed, decided to make the educated guess. In this case, the educated guess was wrong. The knee actually was clean, and as a result, he's getting just destroyed over it. I don't know that it's completely fair. It's just sort of a tough position for Taione to be in. You're kind of having to make a decision on the spot. It's a lot more common, I feel like, in MMA for someone to land a knee to the nuts and have someone get hurt than to land a knee to the body and have someone get hurt. Obviously, knees to the body will hurt people, but those types of knockouts aren't as common as people getting hurt by knees to the nuts. So I guess it's one of those things where it's like if you didn't see where it landed and you see that the guy's hurt, more times than not, it's probably because it landed to the nuts. In this case, that's not what happened, but Taione could have either been like, okay, well, knee to the nuts, I didn't see it, so maybe it's a knee to the... Here's the thing. Like, if it actually was a knee to the nuts and Taione didn't see it and he didn't call it, and then Ed Herman's down and then he calls a TKO, and then you realize that Ed Herman was knocked down by a knee to the nuts, like, at that point, I don't know that he can really go back and restart the fight. So it's one of those things where it's like, if you call TKO after a knee to the nuts basically set up the whole finishing situation, you're probably going to get a no contest. Whereas here, I guess you would hope that there's a little bit more room to work with, but it's just a tough situation where you don't see exactly where knee lands and you have to make a split-second call. Taione ended up making the wrong call, and in the moment it looks bad, but I'm under the assumption that they're going to get this right. It does suck that Rodriguez should have had the win there, had to fight another round pretty much after that. His own unwillingness to tap almost led to him getting a severe injury with his arm as well, and possibly his shoulder, but it sounds like his arm and shoulder are okay, but just sort of a weird situation there. But either way, Ed Herman takes his time, he's able to catch his breath. Looked like he was in trouble at the end of the round, but was able to survive. Third round, gets taken down, goes for a Kimura from half guard, is able to roll Rodriguez over, lands in side control when he ends up on top, steps over the head, and is able to just finish a really tight Kimura. So for Ed Herman, the Kimura itself was nice, but I think he might be in a situation where he's actually going to get a win bonus here, and if this fight does get switched around, I don't know that he's going to owe that bonus back to the UFC, but this fight definitely should be a win for Mike Rodriguez, and he should be 12-4, not 11-5 once this is all taken care of. Fight before that was between Bobby Green and Alan Patrick, as they're pronouncing it, or Alan Patrick, however you wanted to pronounce it. Bobby Green just did a really good job here. Patrick really wanted to make this a grappling match. And Green, to an extent, was willing to do that, but Green did not want to be off on his back, so he was actually taking Alon down a few different times. Was playing relatively safe from top, but still landing some nice shots here and there. Wasn't like overly aggressive where he's getting to the point where he's trying to submit Patrick or trying to create space for heavy enough ground and pound, but he's definitely doing enough to win over time. On the feet, he was able to outland Alon Patrick. Pretty much just played it safe in the grappling exchanges when he needed to. Landed some nice takedowns, and on the feet, definitely had the edge there. So really good performance by him. Fight before that was between Billy Quarantillo and Kyle Nelson. Nelson came out really hard. Looked like he won the first round, but Quarantillo started to take over late in the second round, had Nelson nearly finished, and then early in the third round was able to knock him out and get a really nice finish there. On the prelims, we had Julia Avila versus Sijara Eubanks. After Julia Avila's first fight, looked pretty good. It was kind of wild out there, but it was a really quick fight. So it's like, well, it worked, so it's sort of hard to take it against, or to count that against her. But in this fight, we still saw that wild striking, and that didn't really work as well for her. Looked okay sometimes on the ground, but for the most part, Eubanks was a better grappler, and Eubanks made it show, especially when Eubanks was able to get on top, and in doing so was able to control for much of this fight and win a unanimous decision. Pretty surprising result between Kevin Kroom and Roosevelt Roberts. Kroom was able to drop Roberts really quickly in the first round in less than 30 seconds. And then as Roberts was coming back up, snatched up a guillotine choke and was able to finish that. It's really nice work by Kroom. Alexander Romanov and Roque Martinez. Pretty good showing for Romanov, who was 11-0 coming in, now is 12-0. Was eventually able to take Martinez down in the second round and finish by arm triangle. Jalen Turner was able to get a rear naked choke on Brock Weaver. Brian Barberino won a decision against Anthony Ivy, and Sabino Mazo got a rear naked choke against Justin Kish. So that covers it for this card. The Bellator cards that happened over the weekend, a few pretty good fights that were put on. The main event on Friday, and I unfortunately wasn't able to catch the Friday card. I was out of town. Caught some of the Saturday card, and again, like I said before, I was watching two cards at once. So I'm more just reading results off of here than telling you exactly what happened. But Phil Davis was able to get a split decision win over Lyoto Machida. So it sounds like another really close fight, just like the first one they had in the UFC a while back. Kat Zingano got a decision over Gabrielle Holloway. Taylor Johnson with a heel hook win over Ed Ruth, which is kind of interesting that Ruth suffered another loss here. It's kind of interesting that back when the Bellator welterweight tournament was put together, there was sort of an expectation that Ed Ruth could potentially be like the modern day Daniel Cormier, and that Cormier was sort of like this outsider who had a great wrestling background in the Strikeforce heavyweight bracket, and then came in and just absolutely wrecked shop. So for Ed Ruth, I guess the assumption is that maybe he could do a similar type of thing. But he ended up losing to Neiman Gracie. I believe he has another loss on his record. I don't remember who to. And now is suffering another loss here, and a loss by submission at that. So that's pretty interesting. Another interesting result on the prelim is that former Bellator middleweight champion Rafael Carvalho lost to now 7-0 Alex Polizzi. So that might be a guy worth watching. Tyrell Fortune and Jack May fought to a split decision, and Kevin Lee's younger brother Keith Lee got a unanimous decision win. As for Bellator 246, main event on this one was a really good one between Juan Archuleta and Patchy Mix. Though this is Mix's first professional loss, I was actually really impressed with how he looked in this fight. For Mix, he's been very successful at taking his opponents down and then getting to their back and then finding ways to choke them from their back. And one of my thoughts about this is that Archuleta is one of the best wrestlers in the bantamweight division, just period. And if Mix is going to be able to take this guy down and get his back, that's going to say a lot. And he was. In the first couple of rounds, he was able to take Archuleta down a few different times, was able to get his back a few different times. Archuleta did a good job of not overextending himself on defense and just playing it really tight and being patient. So while he did give up those rounds, he did not give up a choke or did not get finished, and then was able to defend against the takedown better later on in the fight. Mix had been a little bit tired out, and in addition to him being tired out from the effort that he put forth in the 2 rounds, he also had to deal with a lot of body shots that Archuleta was landing, and Archuleta was just outlanding him pretty badly and outstriking him pretty badly in the last few rounds. That was enough for Archuleta to get the win by unanimous decision in what ended up being John Fitch's retirement bout against Neiman Gracie. Like I mentioned last week, this is going to be a really interesting match, and that Fitch, it's like the only matches with Fitch that are exciting are when he gets put up against high-level jiu-jitsu guys, because it's like, well, he's probably going to take him down anyway, so you're either going to get Fitch who just wants to strike the whole time, and which at that point you're not getting the boring Fitch who just wrestles someone and throws a bunch of arm punches that don't do anything. So you're either going to get that, or you're going to get him actually grappling with a high-level grappler, and that's going to be fun. So he decided to grapple with Neiman Gracie. Got out of some trouble early in the first round, but it looked like that first round probably could have gone to Neiman. But in the second round, gets caught in a heel hook, and Neiman Gracie's able to get the tap there. And then afterwards, Neiman, who had been cornered by John Danaher, I guess Danaher, more specifically is who I'm referring to, put up a long post, sort of something I've talked about for a while now, in that a lot of people like to think that's conventional wisdom that leg locks don't really work in MMA because you're going to get punched in the face. And like I've said in the past, and like I've shown in a few of the different breakdowns I've done, leg locks can absolutely work in MMA. You just have to apply the technique properly and make sure that you're positionally sound. And Danaher really was very happy with how Neiman Gracie performed here to show that leg locks absolutely can work in the highest levels of MMA. And for Gracie to get a win over John Fitch, who recently had fought to I believe he fought to a draw, if not a close split decision against Rory McDonald, who was the Bellator champion not all that long ago. For Neiman to be able to finish him shows that he can still, that leg locks work at the highest levels of MMA. And there was a fight between Deanna Bennett and Liz Carmouche. Surprisingly competitive fight. Bennett, I believe, won the second round, or it was pretty close. Was able to stay out of trouble on the ground with Carmouche, but Carmouche was able to take her down in the third round eventually and get her a naked choke. So that covers it for Bellator 246. On to fights that are coming up. We got UFC Vegas 11. That's going to be headlined by Colby Covington and Tyron Woodley. I would really hope that they push some more marketing effort behind this fight. This seems like a fight that could be huge. There's a really good story to tell that doesn't seem like it's being told. It's kind of funny that ESPN loves to just go all in on politics whenever it comes to NFL or it comes to NBA, but when there's actually like politics that sort of like intertwine with sports in this case, where you have like Colby Covington, who's a big Trump supporter, you have Tyron Woodley, who has his opinions, and that's sort of like a storyline between the two of them. You would think that would make more sense than when everyone in the league is just kind of doing the same thing united because the union's behind it or because they're afraid to speak out in any other possible way. The ESPN loves covering that, but for whatever reason, they're really not talking about this story here, and it seems like there's a lot that could be done to really build this fight up. Plus, you had Donald Trump cutting a quick little 15-second promo with Colby Covington at a rally, I believe it was on Sunday. Although that was sort of a weird promo at the end there where like Colby Covington was about to kiss Donald Trump's hand, and Trump kind of gave him a look like, what the fuck are you doing? But awkward promo aside, I really hope that a lot of people tune in for this match, or tune in for this card, because it's going to be a really good card, and this particular fight's going to be a really good fight. As far as what I think is going to happen in this fight, it's tough because Colby, to me, is a big wild card. I don't know exactly what to expect out of him in this fight. For one, he's going to be fighting out of a new camp. Publicly, he'll just say that he's like, does Colby Covington Inc., and he kind of has his own group of people he works with. In an interview, Tyron Woodley said that he believes that the actual camp that Colby Covington is at is MMA Masters, which is down in Florida. There's sort of like a competitor to American Top Team, but never really have had quite the same success, but they've had some good guys in the past. I know they've had Ricardo Lamas working out of there in the past. Amanda Nunes worked out of there before she went over to ATT. So they have a decent room there. It's not going to be the same level of sparring partners as what you get at ATT. The coaching probably isn't going to be at the same level, but to an extent, that could potentially work in Colby Covington's favor. One of the weird things about Colby is that for as successful as he is as a fighter, there are some really obvious holes in his game that you would think that if the right coach gets behind him and actually like gets in his ear and gets him to work on it, it could really have some big results for him. For one, his striking, he is able to put on a really big, he's able to put on a great pace. He's very good about mixing in different types of strikes. But what's really weird to me is that his punches just have a really weird mechanic to him. And it's like, even when he like has a big windup on a punch and like lands a huge overhand, like the power behind it, it doesn't seem like it's really all that mechanically there. Like it seems like if he worked on like his technique a little bit more, he could actually like get more power on his punches. And in a lot of fights where you see him land these huge overhands and like it doesn't do a ton of damage to his opponents, even when it kind of does stumble him a little bit, you feel like some of the punches that he lands, like if the mechanics are a little bit better, like rather than kind of like hurting a guy and making him back up a little bit, like it could drop him and if not finish him. So he's able to find openings for a lot of these strikes, but the strikes just don't, they just have like a weird lack of power to them. It's kind of odd. Like I guess some fighters out there, like when they're striking, they just, their mechanics a little bit off, and even if they're able to find homes for their strikes, it just doesn't do the damage that you'd figure it should, given the strike that's landing. So for Colby, maybe working out of a different camp, if they can work on him with some fundamentals on his striking, and sort of like give him a different look and really get him to work on generating more power, maybe that can work for him in the long run. As far as his grappling goes, just kind of likes to ride guys when he gets on top of them, but it seems like there's a lot of jiu-jitsu that could be mixed in terms of him being able to find positions where he can just kind of like keep guys stuck in place rather than just hanging on and doing wrist rides. And then also being able to find more submissions as well. So maybe just being in a different camp that might give him a different look, and that can help. And now that's that's what you would hope for him if you're hoping for the best for him. But another possibility is that he's working with coaches who probably aren't as good. He's working with training partners who aren't as good, and that could potentially work in the opposite direction as well. So we don't really know what to expect from Colby in his first fight with a new camp. And then on top of that, it's not entirely clear what the damage to his jaw was in that Kamaru-Usman fight. It doesn't seem like he actually had to get surgery on it, but it still might have been fractured. With that being said, it might have just been a small enough fracture where he could just kind of let it heal over time. But among injuries that are really hard to come back from, I'd say outside of bad concussions that keep you out for months, if not longer, having a broken jaw is one of those ones where it's tough to get back in there if you're still not 100% sure and really 100% trustworthy of your jaw and its ability to hold up. I know fighters in the past who have had jaw injuries and then going into their fights after that sort of have a lack of confidence and a little less willing to exchange because they don't want to get hit any more than they have to. In the UFC, I mean, of all the fights that will happen over the course of the year, you could probably count on one hand the number of times that a fighter can get through a fight without taking one shot to the face or one shot to the mouth. So Colby's going to get hit in the mouth by Tyron Woodley in all likelihood in this fight. He's got to know that coming in. The question is he just going to treat it like any other fight? Yeah, that's part of the game. It'll happen. I'll be fine. Or is he going to be extra concerned now that he had that issue in the Usman fight, where that's something that's kind of lingering in the back of his head and making him a little bit more tentative? Because tentative Colby is not going to be the most effective Colby here against Tyron. Colby's going to have to really be going after Tyron. He's going to have to back him up against the fence. He's going to have to be successful in his takedown attempts. And when he does get Tyron down, he's really going to have to take advantage of those opportunities where he's on top, assuming that's what he does. Now, granted, we saw the fight with Usman, and he never really tried to take Usman down. So you kind of have a question, does he take a similar approach here with Tyron, where he doesn't try to take Tyron down, he just tries to strike him? Or is that one of those things where Usman's back was never really up against the fence, so the setups that Colby likes weren't really there? But given that Tyron likes to fight with his back up against the fence, Colby's going to find his setups, he's going to find his openings, and he's going to go for takedowns. So a lot to look for here from Colby's side. From Tyron's side, he's been saying that he's a lot more into this fight than he has been in some of his past fights. Has a lot more motivation. I mean, to some extent, that can mean something. But with that being said, if you're fighting Gilbert Burns, for example, and there's a potential for a title fight if you win, that doesn't get you up. It's fun to say I'm more motivated now, or I care more now, or I want to win more now. But it's going to have to manifest in something different from you, from a technique standpoint, from a strategy standpoint. And I'm not sure exactly what we're going to get here. It's going to be a whole lot different, especially since Colby Covington seems like the type of fighter that Tyron Woodley doesn't exactly want to deal with. A guy who's got a high pace, a guy who's going to back him up against the fence, a guy who's going to be able to mix up what he does against the fence. He's not just going to wait to land a perfect strike there. He might throw a big strike one time, then might shoot underneath one time. He can be successful with his takedowns. He can force you to work your way back up. So it'll be interesting to see if Tyron actually does look any different in this fight than he has in the past couple of fights. But to me, the real wild card is going to be Colby Covington. In the co-main event, we have Donald Cerrone versus Nico Price. We got the return of Donald. I'm trying to think if he's had a fight since that Conor McGregor fight. He might have had one or two, but I think he fought Pettis. So I think it was Pettis, and now it'll be Nico Price. But this is definitely one of those fights that a lot of people want to see just because of the style matchup between the two of them. Not entirely sure that the winner of this fight really pushes their way up in the rankings all that high, but it's definitely going to be one of those fights that people expect to be fight of the night. Then we've got Khamzat Chimaev versus Gerald Meerschaert. Talked about this a little bit last week, and that Meerschaert is probably being brought in here just because he's a black belt in jiu-jitsu, and when you have a guy like Chimaev who is successful in taking his opponents down and controlling them on the ground, you want to give him a guy who, in Meerschaert, or a guy who's similar, where either Chimaev is going to take that guy down and dominate a black belt on the ground, which is wow, he just did that to Meerschaert, or a guy who is you know what, maybe it's not the best idea to take this guy down and try to win the fight on the ground. I'm going to have to actually strike, at which point then you get to see what his striking looks like. So that's what I expect here. We're going to see how Chimaev wants to approach this fight, whether he wants to show some more of his striking here, or whether he wants to see if he can just run through Meerschaert on the ground like he's been able to run through most of his other opponents on the ground as well, assuming that he's able to get the fight down there. We've got Johnny Walker returning against Ryan Spann. This should be a pretty fun one. I feel like this fight's been made a few different times and keeps getting pushed back. Hopefully there's no COVID tests this time that ruin it. We've got Mackenzie Dern returning against Randon Marcos, a couple of grapplers, with the difference being that Mackenzie Dern is actually highly accomplished in grappling, whereas Randon Marcos is more so just a pretty solid all-around MMA grappler. With that being said, I would figure that Marcos is going to try to keep this on the feet, has more experience standing up, and is probably going to try to win this fight on the feet. Sort of tough to pick it. Right now the odds have it in favor of Mackenzie Dern. She's a -165 favorite. I'd be tempted to bet on Marcos just because I think that Marcos is going to want to keep this fight on the feet and is going to be fairly successful in keeping Dern from taking her down. But it's still going to be a fun fight to watch, and it'll be interesting to see if that's what's actually going to happen. And then we've got Kevin Holland versus Darren Stewart, which should be a fun fight at middleweight. On the prelims, we've got Mirsad Bektik going up against Eduardo Garagori. Myra Bueno Silva versus Mara Romero Barella. We got Jordan Espinosa versus David Dvorak. Jessica Rose Clark returning against Sarah Alpar. Journey Newsom versus Randy Costa. Andre Ewell versus Erwin Rivera. Derek Minner versus DJ Laramie. And Tyson Nam versus Jerome Rivera. So a lot of fights on the card, especially on the main card. A lot of pretty big names and a lot of exciting fighters to watch. So let's hope that we don't lose too many fights off this card, or we just don't lose any fights off this card if we're really being hopeful, because there's a lot to look forward to there. Next topic is going to be Dustin Poirier versus Tony Ferguson. So effectively what we're hearing right now is that this is a fight that the UFC wanted to put on as the co-main event for the Justin Gaethje versus Khabib Nurmagomedov fight, and they were trying to negotiate for it, and on Dustin Poirier's side they couldn't come to an agreement, so they decided, look, we're getting nowhere with this, we're going to move on and see if we can get Tony to fight someone else. So that seems like that's where they were at. Where we're at right now on Monday night, it seems like Tony Ferguson is trying to make an effort to like revive the talk here and see if he can't help Dustin Poirier get this fight. I don't know what Dustin Poirier typically makes. I don't know what he's asking for here. So it's sort of hard to tell. I know there are going to be people who every time something like this happens are always going to pick the same exact side, regardless of the information that's available. And that side typically tends to be, look at the UFC, they're just stiffing their fighters and not paying them enough. I would imagine that if the UFC felt like whatever Dustin was asking for was a reasonable offer, they'd probably make it, because this is definitely a big fight and a good fight to make. It makes a lot of sense within the division. So the question is, what is Dustin asking for right now? Is Dustin asking for the same type of money that he made in the past? Is Dustin asking for similar money to what he made against Khabib? I wouldn't think so, because he did take that fight against Dan Hooker recently. I can't imagine he's asking for way more than what he asked for with Hooker. Maybe he is. I don't know. So it's sort of tough to tell, because I don't know what Dustin Poirier is asking for. It's hard for me to say that he's being unreasonable or the UFC is being unreasonable. You would figure that even if Dustin Poirier is asking for more than what he got in the Hooker fight, if the UFC still sees it as being worth it for them, or even after they pay Tony, even after they pay Dustin, they're still getting their money's worth in that fight, you'd figure they'd still do it. So it just seems odd that they'd go about it this way. And hopefully at some point this gets sorted out, and if it doesn't get sorted out, we at least hear from Dustin and find out what exactly he was asking for, so we get more context as to why this fight isn't being made. But if Dustin Poirier is asking for something unreasonable, if he's asking for like a cut of the pay-per-view for the co-main event or something, or if he's asking for like a major increase in pay after the fight versus Hooker, even though he's under contract, it's definitely possible that he's out of line too. It just seems that a lot of people want to assume that if the UFC isn't paying Dustin what Dustin's asking for, then the UFC's out of line. We don't know what Dustin's asking for, so you really couldn't say that. If Dustin wants $100 million for this fight, Dustin's out of line. If Dustin wants the exact same money that he just got in the Hooker fight for this fight, and the UFC doesn't want to pay him, Dustin's within line, and the UFC's out of line. So it's one of those things where it's like, if we don't know the numbers, if we don't know what's being asked for, it's hard to really point fingers at who's right and who's wrong. But it does seem like the UFC is going to try to salvage this fight, or it seems like at least the fighters are trying to salvage the fight. If the UFC decides not to, and they want to send a message to Poirier, that's going to be a little bit unfortunate. At that point, you would hope that Tony Ferguson stays on the card. If for no other reason than if something happens to Gaethje, then you have a guy who can step in and take a fight on short notice. And I'm sure a lot of people would love to see Khabib versus Tony. If they don't get Khabib versus Tony, maybe you get a rematch of Gaethje versus Tony. That could be fine too. So you still want him on the card as far as who a replacement could be. I don't know where Charles Oliveira's health is. I think he was supposed to fight in early October against Beneil Dariush and had to pull out of that, so I don't know if he'd be available 3 weeks later. But Oliveira versus Tony Ferguson would be a great fight. That's one that they can make. But right now, it seems like, at least for the next few days, there's probably going to be a push to revive this talk between Poirier and Ferguson, and maybe that works out. And that's just going to be something to watch moving forward. But hopefully by the time that I do the podcast next week, we actually have some kind of resolution here, because that event is coming up pretty soon. And the longer they wait, the less likely it is that that fight's going to be made. Next topic is Navid Afkari. So I talked about this a little bit last week. Again, it's one of those things where it's like, I would like to just kind of like believe the story that has been given to me, and I really don't know why it wouldn't be true, but it's one of those things where it's like, I've just gotten so used to like the media lying within the U.S. that to hear a story coming out of Iran, it's possible that the media could be lying there as well. So we could be missing some important details. But the details that we have been told is that Navid Afkari, who was a national champion Greco-Roman wrestler for Iran, he attended a protest, was being punished for attending said protest, and the punishment ended up being execution. He was put on a list to be executed. Prior to that, there was a lot of concern within the wrestling community and even onto the MMA community from there, where people were pushing back and trying to get them to halt the execution and to sort of reverse course on that. Got to the point where it got to Dana White. Dana White put up a video on it that got to Donald Trump. Trump had even talked about it, but again, it's one of those things where the U.S. and Iran have really bad relationships. It's not as though Trump really had any sort of like capital to use against Iran or to use with Iran to be like, hey, I'll give you this if you save Afkari. So it's one of those things where it's like an effort was made, but it's not like anyone really expected that effort to be successful. And then news came out, I believe on Saturday, that Navid was in fact executed. So assuming all is true and all he did was attend a peaceful protest and got executed for that, really unfortunate story. It's one of those things where, from what I hear, most wrestlers who wrestle against Iranians and who deal with Iranians say that the people are wonderful, but the government itself is a major issue, whether it's, I believe in judo, where Iranians will have to back out of matches if they're going up against an Israeli. We have this case here where the government's just executing someone for protesting. So definitely a lot of issues within Iran. I don't think I need to tell you guys that Iran is not the most perfectly run country in the world, but this is definitely an unfortunate story, and it's unfortunate to see a promising combat athlete from the world of wrestling lose their life over something so small. So I guess that's really all I can say about that. I don't really know a whole lot more about it other than what I've seen on social media. So if what I've seen is true, it's just a very unfortunate situation. Even if it isn't true, even if he did do a crime that might be more worthy of execution, then in that way, then there's something unfortunate there too. Next topic is Daton Fix, who was the 57 kilogram, I guess in a way you could call him a national champion, that here in the spot for Team USA. He apparently, after going to a tournament in January, came back and tested positive for Ostarine. And had there not been COVID-19, he would have had to have missed the Olympic trials and would not have made the Olympic team this year for Team USA. But fortunately for him, he gets a 1-year suspension on this that goes through the end of January. There is no world team this year. There is no Olympics this year. So even though he's getting a 1-year suspension, he's not going to miss a single Olympic trial. There was no team to make in 2020, and he'll have a shot to make the team in 2021. As far as the story goes, he's saying that it was an accidental ingestion and that his dad would just take Ostarine, and he accidentally used the same water bottle that his dad used, and there was some leftover Ostarine in there. Whether or not that's true, I really don't know, but that's the situation that they have right there. So it's interesting in that you've got a world team member for their Team USA who just popped for a banned substance, but it seems like for the team itself, they're still going to be able to keep him and still going to have him around for this upcoming Olympic cycle. And if he's able to get past Thomas Gilman and Spencer Lee and everyone else who's in that weight class, then it seems like he'll be able to do it as long as he doesn't test positive for anything else again. And then the last thing to talk about is Nick Diaz and whether or not he's going to be returning. So the idea of Nick Diaz returning is great to me. The reason why I put this as the last topic is because I don't think it's very likely at all. The reason I don't think it's very likely at all is even if Nick Diaz wants to fight, Nick Diaz still has to agree to the UFC on a contract. And I would imagine that the money that Nick Diaz wants is going to be very different than what the UFC values Nick Diaz at, especially at this point where he hasn't fought in years. I don't know how long it's been. I feel like it's been almost 8, 9, maybe even 10 years. I don't know how long it's been since he fought Anderson Silva. But either way, it's been a while. It is nice that his brother Nate has been very active and has become a star in the meantime. That helps a little bit with name value recognition. But with that being said, it's not as though we see a huge correlation in other sports where it's like, oh, I love watching JJ Watt, so I can't wait to watch TJ Watt. Or I love watching, let me think if there's brothers in another sport. I know hockey's got a few. I love watching Jamie Benn play for the Stars, so therefore I have to watch Jordy Benn play for the Montreal Canadiens. I don't think people really think that way. So if you just want to make that argument alone, I loved watching Nate Diaz. The casual MMA fan, loved watching Nate Diaz when he fought Conor McGregor and when he fought Jorge Masvidal. So therefore, I'm probably also going to like watching Nick Diaz when he fights whoever he fights. That's not necessarily a given. Now, obviously, as a hardcore fan who actually knows who Nick Diaz is, you're like, what the hell are you talking about? Comparing Jamie Benn and Jordy Benn versus comparing Nick and Nate Diaz is completely different. Nick Diaz was considered the better fighter all along up until he stopped fighting, whereas in those cases, the guys who I was naming as the attraction are well known to be the better of the two brothers. That's the case among hardcore fans. I think among hardcore fans who enjoy watching the Diaz brothers fight, the UFC is going to have no problem selling pay-per-views to them. But the question is going to be, are they going to be able to sell to the casual fan? And to sell to the casual fan, you're going to have to teach them who Nick Diaz is, and hopefully for them, you're going to have enough hardcore fans who are going to be like, who are going to talk to their casual fan, but talk to their casual fan buddies and be like, hey, look, I know he's just the brother of Nate Diaz, but trust me, this guy was actually a lot better than Nate. He stopped fighting for a while, but this is going to be awesome. You definitely have to watch. But for the UFC, selling pay-per-views to the casual fan is going to be the difference here between whether or not they're going to be able to pay Nick Diaz what I think that Nick Diaz is going to ask for, whether they're not going to be able to do so. If Nick Diaz fights at 170 pounds, though, it's one of those things where it's like, I feel like there's a very small amount of people who he can fight where the UFC is going to feel like it's worth paying him. Like if he wants, and again, I don't know what his asking price is, but let's just say that's $5 million for a fight. If Nick Diaz wants $5 million for a fight, you can't just put him in there with just any random multiple. You can't do Nick Diaz versus Neil Magny and think that $5 million is going to be worthwhile to pay him. If you're doing Nick Diaz versus someone who either has a big name themselves or is the kind of guy where you can quickly build them up, maybe they don't have the biggest name by themselves, maybe they don't sell a whole lot by themselves, but when they get put up against someone who does, they do a good job as the B-side. You can think back to Cowboy Cerrone versus Conor McGregor, for example. That fight did very well. When Cowboy Cerrone is on a card, it's not as though it draws a major amount of interest and jacks up the ratings. We're probably going to find that out this week. Cowboy Cerrone is going to be the co-main event on this upcoming card. I don't think it's going to get major ratings. But he's the type of guy where if you put him up against a guy like a Conor McGregor, you put him up against a guy like a Nate Diaz, and let him play the B-side and let people talk about, oh, Cowboy, yeah, he's awesome. Like, we love Cowboy. He can do a good enough job as a B-side to still, like, keep a fight afloat and be able to have that fight still sell pretty well if you have a really strong A-side. So you're either looking for a guy who is a star right now to fight Nick Diaz or a guy like a Cowboy Cerrone who can sort of just kind of hang in there and be a solid B-side. Now, with that being said, do I think that Nick Diaz versus Cowboy Cerrone is going to bring in enough money for them to pay Nick Diaz $5 million plus? I don't think so. Like I think for Nick Diaz, you're looking at a very small group of options here. You're looking at Kamaru Usman just for the sole reason that Usman has the title. If Usman loses the title to Gilbert Burns, then Gilbert Burns would take his place. So whoever has the title, whether that's going to be Usman or whether that's going to be Burns, I think that's one option. With that being said, you cannot put Nick Diaz in a title fight immediately off of like an 8-year layoff or however long it's been, when his last fight was a loss up a weight class. So while that fight might make business sense, it does not make any sense within the sport, so that's not going to be an option. So from there, who do you put him up against? Within the welterweight division, you could do Masvidal. That's an option. Is Masvidal going to take the fight with Nick Diaz? Maybe, but then again, Masvidal is going to be asking for a lot of money on his side of it. So how much is the UFC going to be willing to pay both Masvidal and Diaz, and how much do they think that fight's going to make? That's going to be tough. You obviously can't put him against Nate Diaz, even though Nate Diaz is a draw. You're not going to have Nick versus Nate Diaz. That fight's never going to happen. I mean, outside of that, what are some reasonable options where the UFC can justify paying Nick Diaz what Nick Diaz is likely to ask for? To me, it just seems like the options are very limited, and as a result, I just don't see him coming back. Even if he wants to fight again, he's going to have to agree on money with the UFC, and I see that being a very difficult thing. So if we find that he really is pushing to come back, he gets back and talk with the UFC, and it seems like conversations are going well, then maybe I'll treat this with a little bit more. I'll treat this as though it's more realistic, but I think right now there are just too many things in the way that are going to keep Nick Diaz from coming back, and to me, money's going to be the biggest one, and then his opponents, which kind of go hand in hand with the money, are going to be the other issue, where it's just like there just aren't a whole lot of options for him where it's going to make sense, given the money that he wants. So that covers it for this week. Obviously, I will be recapping the fights in the next episode, so episode 76. I'll be recapping the Colby versus Woodley fight and all the other fights on the card. Then we will be previewing the next UFC pay-per-view. That will be headlined by Paulo Costa and Israel Adesanya, and then also have a light heavyweight title fight on that one as well, so that'll be pretty cool. And then I'm sure within the next handful of days some other news will come up, and I'm trying to think, this weekend I believe is the 19th, so we've still got another week before I get to dig into that who's number one card. That's going to be really cool, where they're going to have that Nicky Ryan versus Tony Ramos match, and a few other really big jiu-jitsu matches. But one of the things that I was busy with over the weekend is going to be pretty relevant to that Nicky Ryan versus Tony Ramos card, so I'll talk about that more when we get closer to the event, but among the things that kept me busy was something to that end, and I'll be happy to talk about it then when it's more relevant. So that covers it for this week. Thanks for being patient with me and listening a day or two later, or however long it took you to get to this, because it's going to be put up on Monday night. But thanks for listening regardless. Appreciate it, and look forward to doing this again on Sunday.